You're listening to the Cash Podcast, creating affluence, success, and happiness with your financial surgeon, Adam Koós, President and Portfolio Manager at Libertas Wealth Management Group at libertaswealth.com.
All right, everyone. I'm here today with Barbara McVicker, Eldercare Expert, national speaker, and award-winning author. But before we get started, as always, a few housekeeping items. If this is your first time listening or watching, thank you so much for joining us. The Cash Podcast is produced weekly, and as stated in the intro, CASH stands for creating affluence, success, and happiness, and that's our mission. My hope is for you to learn a little bit more each and every episode so that you become more successful, wealthier, happier, more educated than you were before you started listening today. So come back often and feel free to subscribe on iTunes and YouTube. In addition, you can also follow me on Twitter at Adam Koós and Instagram at Financial Surgeon. Last but not least, all links, visuals, charts, and any other educational resources are always available on our website. But that's all with the formality, so let's just go ahead and get started. And before we get into the meat of the conversation here, let me officially introduce Barbara McVicker. She's an eldercare expert, as I mentioned earlier, a national speaker, an author of three award-winning books about caregiving, elderly parents. She has a PBS TV special called Stuck in the Middle, hence the title of today's podcast, Caring for Mom and Dad. And she provides adult children with the essential information necessary for all the challenges that lie ahead. You can check out her website at barbaramcvicker.com. That's BARBARAMCVICKER.com for those of you who are listening on iTunes and aren't watching this on YouTube. So if you want to learn more, head over there to barbaramcvicker.com. So Barbara, thank you so much for joining me on this week's episode.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to also mention before we kind of get into questions and answers, you and I were supposed to do our second annual Health, Wealth, and Aging event here in just a couple months. You were going to be the keynote speaker, as you know, and we had to cancel everything, obviously, because of social distancing and event centers being closed and things of that nature. So these are definitely, interesting times, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Yes, very interesting and challenging, though, too.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Well, let's jump into our discussion. So obviously, you're an expert on elder care. You're an expert on everything having to do with aging, the 50-up population. People these days, the title of our presentation today is, helping to care for our parents, our mom and dad during a pandemic. And I don't know that that's going to get much easier from here, or if it's going to get more difficult. Nobody really knows. So things are obviously tough right now. At the onset of the pandemic, I remember driving by 161, a memory care facility, saw a bunch of families surrounding the building and wishing their grandmothers Happy Mother's Day through their windows. And it was just so tough to watch. Obviously, in the middle of a pandemic, what is one of the first things that adult children need to do for the well-being of their aging parents?
I think if they haven't already done this, I'm hoping they have, but a lot of people don't start to talk to mom and dad about the things that they need to do until it's way too late. Kind of nationally, the rule is when the adult child's 40 and mom and dad are 70, you should already have documents and conversations. But when I speak across the country and say that out loud, most people laugh because we're way beyond that. But in answer to your question, there are like 9 areas that you should just always be assessing mom and dad, whether it's financial, like getting to know you, whether it's medical, whether it's housekeeping, whether it's their mental status. We need to look at those constantly, because what happens to us caregivers, we get in the middle of it and we don't see that things are falling off the table. It happens so slowly and one thing after another, and then all of a sudden we're in a mess. And so if we systematically look at the different areas of mom and dad, are they able to take their meds? Are they able to make doctor's appointments? If now in the middle of pandemic where you can't get to them and you can't pick them up and take them places, it's more important that you kind of try to figure out what they need, where are things not happening. And the nice thing is that through your podcast and other information, you can get ideas about how in the middle of this to be able to still help them even if you can't touch them or be directly in contact with them.
What might some of those things be? And you don't have to list all 9 or anything like that, but I mean,
Well, like I said, for instance, knowing doctor's appointments. Now, those become more difficult because, of course, most doctors are not seeing patients,
mm,
um, but they're doing teleconferencing. So some of the things that can be in place, and I know you and I are going to talk about technology a little later, but we need to get those things in place early. So when something like this, a crisis happens, we already have the systems to be able to talk to them, for instance, through Facebook or Zoom, or talk through a FaceTime, so that we know that we can still communicate with them. Standing outside of a window is not necessarily very satisfying, and they're not seeing their grandchildren, because right now grandchildren are sticky wickets. So we need to get things in place ahead of time.
so be prepared. Don't wait till your house has been burglarized 5 times before getting an alarm system. And that's a true story, by the way. Sadly, growing up, I'm not sure if it was the alarm system that stopped the burglaries when I was growing up, or if it was just 5 times is enough an average for everybody in their lives. I think we made up for everyone, but yeah. So be prepared. Get ahead of things. Don't wait until you step on the landmine to do the planning first. That makes sense. I mean, I often hear stories from my clients about the challenges and conflicts that happen in the middle of caregiving. I mean, can you tell us more about this?
The conflicts happen not only intergenerational, where mom and dad don't want to talk about finances, they don't want to talk about end-of-life decisions, but it can also happen within a generation. And I hear all the time that siblings aren't on the same page, and it's because we haven't had open conversations. We haven't had family meetings. We haven't talked about, okay, if something happens, who's going to take care of the finances? Who's going to become our Medicare specialist? And the biggest thing is that I feel like siblings don't all share in the care at the same amount. And those people that are doing the hands-on every day feel like they have footprints across their face because not everybody is helping. So the best thing siblings can do for each other is to say, what do you need? What can I do to help you? Can I come stay a week so that mom and dad, so you can take off and mom and dad are being taken care of. And particularly in the middle. I'm sorry, yeah?
Just to get a break, basically.
Oh, definitely, respite. But in the middle of this pandemic, it has changed a little bit because some of the decisions are much greater than that. For instance, if mom and dad are in a care facility, do you take them out of that care facility because of what might be happening within it, or you want to make certain you've got eyes on mom and dad? Okay, so who's going to take care of mom and dad? I mean, you're talking about kids in school and a pandemic, and how do we take care of our kids in the middle of this and still work? How do you take care of an elderly parent day in and day out if you're not prepared and you don't have the systems in place? So we need to talk in terms of families, of everybody pitching in and planning for a crisis as opposed to waiting for a crisis.
I hear that a lot.
That's where I think that's where you come into play. Sometimes you could be the person, the professional, because they don't listen to us. What do we know? What do the adult children know? But you are a professional and you have an office, and so they're going to listen to you.
Yeah, one of the things, it's funny you mentioned that, actually. I wasn't going to bring this up today, but just this year, we started this new initiative because once the pandemic started, literally almost every single client appointment we had canceled and wanted to meet after, quote unquote, things got better or the dust settled. Of course, things aren't really back to that old normal again, but we had probably 4 to 6 weeks where we maybe had a couple of meetings per week, and that was it. So it was pretty quiet around here. Not a lot of phone calls, not really a whole lot of emails. And so we took that time to work on an initiative that is 2.5, almost 3 years in the making. We call it the My Promise Initiative. We have this My Promise kit that we put together, which includes everything from health emergency items, things like their healthcare directive, medical history, supplements, pharmaceuticals, they're taking prescription drugs, and having on not all of that in paper form, But having that in a file, fireproof cabinet, having it online in a vault, we call it the My Promise Vault, an encrypted vault online that the kids can have access to. They don't have to get full access initially. We can give them limited access where they just see, their parents' name, address, phone number, email. And then if something, heaven forbid, happens to mom or dad, whether they be incapacitated or can't respond to doctor's notes, we flip a switch and it gives them full access to this information so they can take care of them. And then we're also, we bought a ton of these, what are called ICE keys, in case of emergency keys. And they're USB keys that goes on a keychain so that all this information that medical professionals and first responders would need is there at, and you always have it with you. So, if I don't know, if there's a decision that's life or death, you don't have to wait for someone to get a medical healthcare directive or advanced healthcare directive to have that information. But the kit also includes all the other things, of course, like password organizer, how to log in and to phones and computers, pay the bills, things like estate planning documents, powers of attorney, trusts. Deeds to the house, life insurance policies, investment statements. So kind of having your financial house, I guess, in order, not only in physical form, but redundantly backed up online so that the family has it so they can help their parents in a time of need. And then, of course, like I mentioned, that ICE key. So it's interesting you mentioned that because I think that's a huge push we're making. None of us are getting any younger anytime soon. So I think that being proactive as opposed to reactive is probably crucial. But I don't want to go off on a tangent there. I think I already did, but let's change gears a little bit. I mean, with businesses opening around the United States, I know some of the states are starting to slow down that reopening process, which I don't know that makes things better, but restrictions on baby boomers and those who are older, they've only been easing in the slightest bit, especially, those who have health concerns that render them, call it, at risk, right? So obviously with the shelter in place, many of the elderly can't have visitors at all, kind of like you alluded to earlier. I mean, that's got to make them really, really lonely sometimes.
Yes, and in fact, even before the pandemic, they were talking about isolation, that isolation is in its own fact a chronic disease now, realizing that people that don't have interaction, eat alone, don't ever get touched, that those are just as debilitating. And of course, the other component of that is depression. And you put that all together in a pandemic where you can't touch the person, where you can't be in the same room with them. And so I believe that this is something we really need to pay attention to with our aging parents is isolation. How can we get around that? And as you said, drive by the house, park at the end of the driveway, and have the grandkids yell at grandma and grandpa. We've got to be creative. Or, it's their birthday and you take balloons and put them in the front yard. We've got to be creative about how to still connect without the way we normally connect. But to just be aware that mom and dad need much more interaction than they probably will be getting. Maybe even get friends or people from church to say, okay, I'm going to call her every Tuesday. Something where there's enough going on and just enough variety. And I always talk about to the adult children, delegate away the things that other people can do. You should only be doing the things that only you can do. So that means a phone call, somebody dropping off a baked good on the front steps, engage other people. And in fact, I think people in this time want to be doing something, want to feel like they're helping other people, but don't know how. And so to ask a friend, hey, could you stop over, or could you pick up groceries and leave them on mom's doorstep? I think we need to realize that we're a village in the middle of this pandemic.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, in fact, I've been joking, kind of half joking, I guess, that the next stimulus package should be computers loaded with Zoom for everybody over a certain age that doesn't have one. Just because I know it's not the same as a hug, or the personal touch, but I mean, it's better than nothing, being able to see, kind of like you and I are doing right here. You're in the comfort of your home. I'm in my office, but we're having a conversation kind of like we're sitting across from each other. So I think probably the more they can do. And then there's proximity effect, right? So you're mentioning that I think what you were, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but I think what you were saying when you said even a phone call, I mean, you don't have to be in proximity of your loved ones, and you don't have to drive by. You don't have to litter their front yard with flamingos or anything like that. I mean, you can make a phone call. You can make it a regular thing, kind of like, Friday night pizza night. It can be, Tuesday night, call mom and dad and have a, little conversation every night, just to have, I mean, it's probably something for everyone to look forward to, really, right?
Definitely, they need something to look forward to. I think one of the things that we adult children need to be thinking about is, so we're going to age. What things should we get in place? I think as you were talking about, if mom and dad have Zoom, that's great. I don't know how many of the elderly have Zoom or know how to install it. Maybe they can do FaceTime, or maybe
Sure.
there is nothing in their home that makes it possible to actually see the person. So we need to be also preparing for the fact that as technology rolls out, maybe we need to stay on top of that technology.
Totally
So
agree.
that as we age, we already know how to do telemedical things. We know how to, as you say, put on a flash drive all of our information. So what you were talking about doing for your clients is absolutely fabulous. It'd be great, and I'm certain
Thank
medical people wish that people had that on them physically. But we need to be proactive in ourselves. Whatever's coming out, and particularly with augmented intelligence coming out, the kinds of things that we could put in our houses. And I'm going to skip a second. We keep kind of bumping up against
you're fine.
technology. But the idea of what is available even now, the monitoring systems, the systems where mom can get up in the morning and Alexa or Hey Google tells her that it's Thursday and what the temperature is outside. There are systems now that you can put under rugs that let you know if the person has had a stroke. There's monitoring systems that remind mom and dad to take their meds. Maybe you were used to going every week and laying out the meds. Now you're unable to do that. So what are the things that we can put into place? And maybe what this will do is, when things calm down, that we should go in and put all these things in mom and dad's house, so that the next time the crisis, because there will be a crisis, it may not be a pandemic, it may be something else, but we've got cameras, we have monitoring systems, we have bracelets that they can wear that let you know if they're in atrial fib. So we need to figure out how to embrace technology.
Totally agree.
And particularly for the elderly.
I think it's
But
interesting.
I think it's going to be exciting. Whatever comes up the road, I think it's
sure.
going to be exciting.
For sure. I will say two things. First, I was shocked, actually, I mentioned that, for 4 to 6 weeks, we had no appointments. I mean, we offered everyone Zoom meetings instead, and they said, let's just wait till after this thing's over and we'll meet then, face to face. And, we've got clients all over the country, and we've been doing Zoom, and before that it was GoToMeeting. We've been doing it for years.
Okay.
And so it's not abnormal for us. It's just abnormal for a lot of people. Right. But after the 6 weeks went by, call it 8 weeks, I guess, maybe, and people started saying they were ready to get back together, so we'll call it our March, April, May appointments, started wanting to finally meet. We've had, I think, 68 meetings in the last 3 months. And of the 68, 10 of them were face-to-face. So I will say that it's encouraging that people are embracing technology. Maybe it's because they did, a family happy hour and learned how to use it, or were forced to learn how to use, Zoom, or what's the one, Party? I forget what the other app is, but there's FaceTime, like you mentioned. And then the other thing I was going to mention is I wasn't aware of some of these technologies you're even mentioning, which is fascinating, especially being kind of a tech nerd that I am. But even if we're in the middle of a pandemic, I think that there's probably some loopholes and workarounds that, instead of waiting for things to get better and install these things after the fact, that, if we drop ship, an Amazon Dot or an Amazon Alexa to mom and dad, let's just say, and then we walk over to their house with our iPad. If we want, not to be so ridiculously conservative here, but I mean, it is what it is. We could even go outside, connect to their Wi-Fi network from outside the walls, set up the Alexa app for them from outside without coming into physical contact. And we've got that tool in place, perhaps. So I think that there's probably still ways to maybe do some of that now, don't you think, that as opposed to waiting?
Yes, and I'm certain there are people you can hire who
Oh, sure.
are equal to what you know and more than what I know. I just keep thinking maybe a teenage boy down the street could figure out how to
Right.
do some of these things. Yes, and I know that Google and a lot of the other big tech companies are rolling out things almost daily in terms of how to connect, how to get feedback from mom and dad on a constant basis. So I think that this is going to push us as a country and hopefully the elderly into new ways of doing things. And some of this augmentation that we're going to force ourselves into is going to really be helpful because it's going to do monitoring that we wouldn't ordinarily have monitored. And as I said, the kinds of things that are being rolled off in terms of how we can see, did mom take those pills when the buzzer went off today?
Right.
And if not, then you call her and say, Mom, you need to go do this. So I think we're going to have some really good items in the near future. But we need to learn how to use them and we need to install them. The tough thing is all the studies about technology is that it has a socioeconomic and education relationship.
You're right.
And so not everybody's going to get into this new way of using technology in a positive way. So it will be, I'm hoping that we all figure out how to use all this information.
I remember talking to, I forget his name. I wish I could because I'd love to plug him right now, but he's a guy actually in Dublin years ago who was coming up with this concept of what is teledoc today, of, figuring out, but his mission is to get diagnoses and healthcare in the hands of everyone in the world who has a phone for free. And I know that that's not necessarily an alert system. It's not a monitoring system, but I think it's a step in the right direction anyway toward offering everybody at least a baseline of, call it emergency care or just diagnosing through 3 different steps, I believe it was, to find out just by looking at someone and talking to a doctor on your phone, whether or not, you're sick, what you should do and things of that nature. So I think things like that, like you mentioned earlier, teledoc, teleconferencing with doctors is great. But yeah, I'm with you. I think that it'd be great. Maybe I keep joking about stimulus packages, but maybe that's another one. Computers and technology for healthcare for all, right?
Oh, and free.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Well, the message I think I'm hearing today is just to recap what we've talked about is we want to be communicating with our loved ones. We want to make sure even if we can't touch them, hold them, hug them, we want to be creating routines and a system, as you put it, systematically, giving them a phone call, stopping by, saying hi, social distancing, sitting in the driveway and talking to each other, maybe putting a fire in the driveway and staying 18 feet apart. I don't know, go above and beyond, right? And then, you talked about siblings and how, siblings need to work together. And I'm sure there's a certain amount of guilt there probably for some siblings who can't be there to help. And I'm sure there's some situations where some siblings may make others feel guilty, maybe not intentionally, but that might happen perhaps. I don't know, maybe
Don't siblings always do that? Mom liked you better than...
Right, never. Yeah, so siblings need to work together. I understand. What else did I learn from you today? We have all the technology, which again, I can't reiterate more how much that's blowing my mind. I guess I just didn't... I haven't run up against it yet. Unfortunately, my grandparents have all passed, but I guess with my parents, even though they're in their late 60s, I think that, we need to talk about some of these things as they age, I suppose, and get ahead of it as opposed to waiting again until after your house has been burglarized to buy the alarm, right? Is there anything else, I guess, you would add? Just things from your books or not even necessarily having to do with the pandemic?
I think that both your thought and my thought is do this sooner than later. Get the 7 essential documents, get systems in place. have the family meeting. We wait until there's a crisis, and crises are not a good way to be talking about whether it's end of life, whether it's can mom stay by herself, do we take her out of the assisted living and have her move in with one of us? Those conversations usually happen in the middle of an ER or in the middle of a pandemic, and it's really too late. So if we can get everybody listening to this say, okay, you said your parents are late 60s. Okay, it's time to have this done. And mom and dad, I'm asking you to do this out of love and safety. And because we love you, we need to know what it is you want done, how you want to live out your life, and we want to figure out how to best support you in your choices.
That's great. Yeah, and it kind of goes right along with the My Promise kit, being prepared, getting ahead of it. And well, again, if anybody who's listening on iTunes or watching here on YouTube, if you'd like to get more information on Barbara, if you'd like to read her books, or if you're looking for a top-notch speaker for your organization, not this year maybe, but next year perhaps. We'll see.
I think virtually, I think we can do anything.
Doing some virtual? Okay. Maybe we do that. We'll have to talk about that. But check out Barbara's website at barbramcvicker.com. Again, that's BARBARAMCVICKER.com for those of you who are listening. And you can also contact her there as well if you want to reach out and just kind of ask a question that's private or confidential to you and your family. We will obviously end up doing that health, wealth, and aging symposium. Maybe it'll be next year, but I'm looking forward to the face-to-face big version like we did last year. So we look forward to that. But thank you so much again for being on the episode and for offering so much valuable information and education. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure that our watchers and listeners do as well.
Thank you, Adam, and stay safe.
Thank you so much. But all right, well, that's it for today's episode. We realize there are thousands of podcasts out there, and you chose to listen to ours today. So thank you so much for listening. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and YouTube, as I mentioned earlier. Please feel free to share this podcast with your friends, your loved ones, and in this case, your parents. If you want more educational information, you can sign up on our website at libertaswealth.com to receive our screencast videos and articles that we send out on a regular basis. Again, you can also follow me on Twitter at Adam Koós and on Instagram at Financial Surgeon. So thank you so much again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Cash Podcast with your financial surgeon, Adam Koós. To see any charts or images that were mentioned in this show, or to check out additional articles, videos, and other educational resources, head over to libertaswealth.com.